Hey everybody, good evening. Yeah, I know the chat window doesn't look so great, and so if you're patient with me, I might be able to make a shift in that. It's hard for me to estimate what that looks like until we actually get there, and so I may have the capacity here to make a shift. Let me just see what can happen here. So appreciate your patience in that. And I will do the best I can here to at least try to improve things a little bit. Hope everybody's hanging in there, doing well. Appreciate you checking in, and again giving me a little bit of opportunity to make some shifts here at the beginning. So we'll see if I can improve things a little bit. All right, we'll see if this works. It's been a beautiful day today. I hope you were able to enjoy some of the beautiful world that God created today. So Kelly says it looks okay, so she doesn't want me to mess with it. That's probably the best plan. Get right down to it. Listen to my wife. We'll just do the best we can. So, okay. Well, again, glad you're here with me and that we're together. And it's always a wonderful opportunity to study together and learn together and open our minds and hearts together, particularly around this issue that we're focused on here this evening, which is very challenging, as we all know. In fact, we are living in the midst of a very challenging world right now. And, one of the realities of that in the midst of a pandemic, of all things, has been this eruption around racial tension, of course, centered in a cry, really, for racial equality. And, all of us are aware of the responses to the tragic deaths of individuals at the hands of law enforcement, particularly black men. And we've had several of those, a couple of those really, in very recent history. George Floyd, of course, being the kind of epicenter of that. But then Rayshard Brooks, not long ago. And so all of that, that tragic death, and then the response to that is, why we're together here this evening, wanting to think about that and what it is as people of faith we're called to be about in response to that. So I appreciate you checking in here tonight as we use a resource that's a little bit different than what we normally would do. Normally we'd have a book that we'd be reading or material that we'd be referring to, and in this case, as you know, it's a sermon by Andy Stanley. Now, Andy Stanley is a pastor of a mega church, as we call it. It's a huge conglomeration of multiple congregations outside of Atlanta. I believe the congregation was originally founded by his father, and now Andy has, over these years, taken over. Andy's not a young man himself. I think he's actually my same age, of 62, and so he's been at it a while. And in a couple of places where I've written some about Andy, I've said, I don't know that he and I would be aligned around all matters theologically. In fact, I know that's true. I'm trying not to use labeling, because labeling is part of the problem that we're in, I think, when it comes to racial tension. But I'm just, putting it right out there on the table that Andy Stanley is not somebody that I would regularly go to, to find my theological teaching. And yet, as I came across the sermon and it was shared with me, I was really captivated by it. And obviously, I thought it was important enough, and I was encouraged, as a matter of fact, to then share it with you. And the fact that you've taken time to, find out what that message is all about, again, I appreciate. And if you have had the chance to listen to the sermon, you'll know that it's thought-provoking, that it's challenging at points, and that it pushes us in ways perhaps that we haven't been pushed, in the way that we think about those who are different from us, and particularly in regards to race, racism, racial tension, racial equality or inequality, injustice, and so on. So we're going to do our best here this evening to have some conversation about it. We know that as we're checking in, that we also have people who will see this as a recorded video. So we want to welcome them and thank them for being a part of the process as well. It would be infinitely better, of course, if we could be together and in a room somewhere and able to talk together and see one another and kind of get a sense beyond just words, how we're feeling and how we're doing around all of these matters. Well, we can't do that, and we know all the reasons why. So this is one way to try to get at that. And again, I appreciate your willingness to participate, and encourage those of us who are logged in and are having access to the chat feature to share your comments, your insights as we move along, and that'll be helpful to us. So look forward to what we'll be sharing together. Let me offer a prayer at this point, then we can get into the discussion, and we'll certainly want God to be with us, or us to be with God is probably a better way to say that, as we share in our conversation. So let's pray together. God, we give you thanks first of all for one another. We are reminded constantly of your great love for us in Christ. We are affirming again here tonight that you are our Creator, and that you give us and all living things life, that you breathe into us and all human beings your breath. And so we know that we are, by way of you, a family of human beings together. And so help us who are connected here tonight to be open to your leading, shape our hearts and minds once more, to be reconnected and rededicated to the way of Jesus in the world. And all of this we pray in Christ's holy name. Amen. All right, so here's the format that we're going to follow tonight. I've got some various clips from the sermon, and I'd like to show those and then invite us to reflect on them with some questions that I'll pose, and we'll kind of move through our time together that way. In the description box under the video where you found this video posted originally, you'll see some things listed there. One of those is the link for the sermon if you haven't had the chance to listen to it fully. So I've put that link out there again for you. And then I'll make mention of those other couple of links later on, but I wanted you to know that the whole sermon, Andy Stanley's sermon, called This Human Race, is at that link if you have yet to visit it. Okay, so let's get started. I want to move to clip number 1. And I've got to say right away that Andy Stanley's style, at least in this message, is very direct. He doesn't pull any punches, so he goes right at it. So you'll see that here. And he's talking about how this whole situation makes us feel. In fact, I think before I share the video clip, that would be a good question to get some interaction from you initially. How are you feeling? How does all of this that's taking place in our society, across our nation, in our communities, even in the world, how is that making you feel? What are some of the emotions that you wrap around that? And again, you can put that right here in the chat box if you'd like to do that. How does all this make you feel? And I know there's a little bit of a delay between me asking the question and you posting an answer, but I want to encourage you just to put it right out there. And we can then respond together. So yeah, how does it make you feel? So some of the responses. Again, just kind of waiting on you, making sure things are kind of posting. Is it working? Oh, I hope it is. It looks like it might have held up on me here. How's it working, guys? Anything working? Okay, I've got to resize this. Hold on a second so I can see what's going on. Like I said, it's the technology that really makes me nervous. Everything else, we kind of know where we're going with this. But the technology, here we go. Okay, thank you. It's flowing now. So we've got some responses to how it makes you feel. Kelly says excited or hopeful for the change. So sometimes out of this great pain, change comes. And Dave says angry that so little has changed. So it's it's a question of looking forward or looking back, and sometimes it's a spinning around of all of that at once. Tim says that Joan says actually she feels inadequate, and maybe that's in the sense of trying to understand it or trying to get a handle on it. Kathy says very frustrating feeling. I think we all kind of share in that. Carol says sad, again, but hopeful for the change, knowing that it won't be easy. So there's challenge just wrapped into it. Faith says pain for black friends, those who we know who are persons of color, and what it might mean for them or does mean for them. Sandy says disturbed, concerned, also hopeful. There's that sense of things can change, and we're trusting that things will change, and to be able to be a part of that change. And Brian says, sees the sides cementing, and I don't know if you mean, Brian, that things are kind of, folks are finding their camp, and they're solidifying their positions, and those are against each other. I think that might be what you're saying. Karen says, feels on edge, not sure what to say. How to respond to the situation. Certainly there's that part of it. What do we do and what do we say in response to it? Phil says frustrated, sad, but hopeful. Again, that kind of mixture of emotions. And Alex says troubled and confused, unable to comprehend all of the hatred and the oppression, that it's still there. And I think, Alex, you're not alone in that. This experience that we're in makes it very evident that it's still there. Don and Doug or Kathy, I think this might be Doug, I'm not sure. Larry, there's little that's new here. Hopefully the biggest change is the demand for change. So we've been here before, I guess is what I hear you saying, Doug. And again, the hope is that something new or different would come out of it this time around. Tim says being part of the change means being an anti-racist, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Andy Stanley does, and the Lord shows us how. Thanks for all of that. You may still have more responses that you're putting out there. Let's go to the first clip, because Andy Stanley talks about the way we feel and some of what he thinks is important about that. So let's go to the clip, and we'll be right back and continue the conversation.
I've heard people talk about how sad all of this makes them feel, but come on, sad is how we feel when something happens that doesn't really affect us personally, something that's far away. This sad is about somebody else, and I hope we can all agree that this is bigger than sadness. This affects all of us, and consequently, all of us have a role to play. Now, I know some people are sometimes uncomfortable with people like me leveraging the words of Dr. King, but come on, he said so much and he said it so well. And he goes right to the epicenter of our point. The reason this has to become personal for me, and the reason this has to become personal for us, is this. Injustice anywhere, you'll remember this quote, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So for us to move past what we're experiencing as a nation with nothing more than a bad case of sad is to miss the significance of this moment. And it's to miss the opportunity of this moment as well. He goes on and he writes this. He says, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Now, this is true now more than ever. It's true now more than ever because what happened in South Georgia was seen by people in North Dakota, and what happened in Minneapolis has been seen by people, well, people all over the world. And then he concludes with this: whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. In other words, there's no them. There's just us. So sad isn't enough. And I certainly don't have to tell my black brothers and sisters that, right? You aren't sad. You're mad. And understandably so. You're scared. You're scared because, well, you didn't see a 46-year-old stranger with a knee on his neck. You saw you. You saw your father, your brother. I have two African-American friends who recently became fathers for the first time. They saw their sons. They saw the death of progress. They saw the death of hope. They saw the death of, well, maybe my kids will grow up in a different kind of America, a better America. And if that doesn't affect me personally, if that doesn't make me more than a little sad, then I'm a hypocrite to even call them friends.
Like I said, Andy puts it right out there. So he's saying sadness isn't enough. And he might even say some of the other responses that we had around what we feel, that's just not enough. And he's pushing us here at this part of his message to consider how all of this impacts us personally. And so I wanted to put that question out there and have us think about that together. What is the impact on us? What does all of this make happen in us? What does it bring out? What does it cause to kind of come to the surface, in us and our thinking and the way that we respond and work with one another? So Catherine's saying there's confusion growing up in a city, working with blacks, people of color, interracial marriages in the family, and your uncle is a cop as well. So there's all of this. So it impacts you personally. Catherine's saying because we have relationships, many of us, that tie to issues of black or white, or persons of color, or persons who are white. And what are some other things that happen? I guess I'm thinking also just about what it starts to make, I want to say make possible in us that perhaps wasn't possible before. In other words, one of the things I was thinking about was, in addition to being bewildered, as Catherine adds here, is that it causes me, one of the impacts is causing me to reflect upon my own attitudes and my own judgments of others. So one of the things that happens is I start to, examine my own life in ways that maybe I haven't before, or I haven't in a long time. Sandy says more and more recognizing that she's a person of privilege as a white woman, and then the concern for members of, let me put Sandy's out there in case it didn't show. There it is. Members of extended family who are black, and all of that becomes so real for those who are black. It kind of in a way causes us to reflect upon who we are and our place in all of this. And that's significant. That kind of makes a difference for us. So what are there any other ways in which you find things happen in you as a result of a deeper awareness or this situation as it emerges in our culture and all around us? I was just in some of my notes thinking about as it causes me to reflect upon my own place in it. It also, as a person of faith, causes me to think about that connection. Where does my faith connect to this issue? To just, again, like Andy Stanley says, feel sad about it isn't enough. Is my faith informing me here or shaping me in my response in some way? Or if it's not, should it? And so there's that, again, self-reflection of who I am, not just as a person, but as a follower of Jesus, as a Christian. And what difference is God calling there to be in me? What change is God wanting to work in me in response to what's happening? Sandy adds that she's also become more aware of her own, she says, biases and racial thoughts and perceptions. And I guess that's part of what I'm saying. I think that's really something that can happen. And what I hear Andy Stanley saying is that if we don't recognize kind of our place in it personally, then we're missing something. We're not quite at the place where maybe we should be, or where God intends for us to be. And so, all of that then becomes something significant to be thinking about. And Faith says she's trying not to retreat into the largely white bubble of POW, which is what we have here. I mean, let's face it, that's an honest take on where we live, and just leave it to other people to figure it out, but to somehow be involved in bringing about the change. So it's somewhat easy, I guess you might say, to be insulated because of where we are, where we live, where our church, where our community and neighborhoods are. And, Faith says trying to break out of that or break through that. Catherine says, it's hard to condone the violence, and I know there's a lot of tension around that, and in some ways it becomes the very thing that distracts us from the heart of the issue. And I get what you're saying there, but how else can we get the change? So the pain sometimes is just so great. Kathy says there's guilt related to what we haven't done or what we should have done. Again, thinking about the impact that this makes on us personally. So Andy Stanley, puts that out there early in his message, that it's got to be more than just I'm sad about it, or it's too bad all of this is happening. Somehow he says we've got to allow it, because it so is wanting to do this connect to us at a very personal, real, passionate place. And to let that happen is partly what I hear him saying. So let me move to clip 2. He's going to be talking about, he's going to start right away with this clip with what he calls the messy middle, where it's not clear, where we want answers but there aren't answers. And I think we'd all say that's a pretty good description of kind of where we are on this. And then I want to come back and talk about some of his description of what that is. So let's go to the second clip, and be back in just a moment. We'll keep it going.
The messy middle, that's where the brutal, uncomfortable facts all come together. But it's also where problems can be solved. But it is so uncomfortable. It's so much easier to retreat to the echo chamber of extremes where everybody agrees, but nothing is ever accomplished. In the messy middle, we're confronted with uncomfortable facts. And by the way, facts aren't fair, but facts don't care. Here's an uncomfortable fact. White people fear black men. That's not fair, but it's true. What makes this even more unfair is that in the vast majority of cases, our fear of black men is in no way connected to our personal experience. And if that wasn't unfair enough, study after study has shown, this, that fear of black men doesn't even spring primarily from racism. It's deeper than that. And that's not fair to black people or white people. Most black men have experienced what some people refer to as the fearful gaze of white men and women. Then on the other side of the equation is this: the majority of African Americans in our country, they don't trust the criminal justice system, do you? I mean, you fear the police. That's not fair. Facts don't care. It's not fair to police officers with spotless records who risk their lives every day for people they don't even know, for people who in some instances don't even like them. I was a journalism major in college, and during the murdered and missing children chapter of our city's history, some of you remember that, as part of an assignment, I had an opportunity to ride along with a black City of Atlanta police officer on the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. So we were together all night. And honestly, I was pretty much scared the entire night. Not of him, but we went from one domestic violence case to another all night long. And I saw firsthand, just a little bit, I saw firsthand the challenge of trying to play by the rules when confronting people who don't even know there are rules. So White people fear black men. The majority of black people don't trust the police. Most police handle themselves professionally. And then there's this. Whereas our fear of black men is rarely, if ever, connected to personal experience, if you're an African American, you know this. Your mistrust of the criminal justice system is connected to personal experience. Us white folks, we fear what might happen. You fear what has happened. And then, as bad as all of that is, that's not even the worst of it. The really bad news is this. Statistics, data, sermons, protests, none of that will ever change any of those cultural realities. Telling the black community how many times the criminal justice system has worked in their favor, has worked in your favor, that does nothing to diminish your mistrust, does it? Underscoring how quickly a police officer was fired and then arrested, that doesn't address your fear. For the same reason that reminding white folks how many more times they've been hurt by, ripped off by, deceived by white people than black people, that doesn't erase our fear of black men. If you're afraid of flying, you get this. Come on. Data, statistics, lectures, none of that helps, does it? I mean, being told that statistically you are safer in the air than you are on 285, that doesn't erase your fear of flying. And here's why. Because facts and data rarely replaces fear. And facts don't build trust. The only thing that has the potential to replace deep-seated fear and distrust is experience. We can't talk our way. We can't law our way. We can't talk our way or law our way out of this mess. We can't pie chart and graph, bar chart our way out of this. The only way forward is we have to experience something different. We have to experience our way forward.
All right, we'll catch more in just a minute, but let's take a moment right there. There was some challenging ways of thinking, I thought, in that segment of his message, and I put the one up there that I thought kind of made me really sit up and take notice. He made the statement in so many words that white folks fear black men. And I wanted to, and again, it'd be so much better if we could be together and kind of debrief this face to face. But given the limitations of our setting here tonight, I just wanted to get your take on that. If you've got a reaction to that, what your response is to that statement. Does he seem to be, is he accurate with that? I don't know that I'd ever thought about it in that stark of a way. And then particularly when he described what some who are black would describe as the stare that they get from us who are not persons of color, that just seem to have that kind of distrust look. And, are there ways in which we participate in that? Is it true to our experience? Now, I realize, it might be hard to respond in the chat window to say, yeah, I fear black men. Because I guess to agree with Andy would be to say that that's true. So maybe it's not even possible to actually, use this technology to respond to how we react to that statement. But if you're like me, I guess what I'm saying is it really caused me to pause and to give thought about what aspects of that are both true for me, perhaps personally, but also where that is systemically at work in just the way that we are as a culture, regarding the way that we do, the way we do business, so to speak. The business as in the sense of our routine lives. So Sam says, yeah, some people do. And, I think that's what we're saying. And I think what Andy's saying is it's not only just some people, it's probably most of us. And it may even be all of us to some level or degree or not. Dave says, what does he mean that this goes beyond racism And I'm not sure, I don't remember that statement exactly, Dave, so I don't have an immediate response. If somebody has a take on that and wants to respond to Dave's question, that would be great. Catherine says that she wouldn't say it's fear, but let's see. Oh, as you were saying up above in your previous comment, you've had friends who are black, and that you stay in contact with them. And of course, we're going to say a word about that friendship aspect. Andy has something to say about that too in his message, so we want to kind of hold on to that. So thank you, Catherine, for that. Tim says there's a recent commercial where a black man continues to get the look. It's a different situation, he says, but the scene is this black man is shown to be a judge. So he's the one casting the judgment, I guess, huh? So, it's hard to make categorical statements that just apply to everyone, and that's always the danger in preaching, particularly. So we have to understand that, but I think, Andy's intent here probably is to have us really acknowledge the fact that there are some ways of thinking that just are a part of our culture that we may not even be aware of. Doug says, grew up outside of Chicago, exposure to black people is getting lost around a particular housing project, and the experience is everything. So, that he did say that in that clip, that's in a sense the antidote to the fear. What he went on to say is it's not just the data. You can't just give somebody rationale to not fear or feel the way that they do. That might be a little bit of what he was talking about, Dave, about going beyond racism. That it comes down to, that innate fear that we have of those who are different than us. Racism then is the result of that, but at the base level, he may be saying it's fear. Fear of that which is different, fear of that which is unknown, fear of that which I perceive to be a threat to me. One of the ways I was thinking about that recently is that, we could say it's all about, I don't want to lose my share of whatever this life and world is supposed to be, and someone who's different from me is a threat to take some of that away. And so, in that kind of way of thinking, it's all about self-preservation, and that's a very base level. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what he's getting at, but that comes to my mind as I'm thinking out loud with you. Carol says, I don't think it's fear anyone by their color. I watch their actions. So Carol's saying it's more what she perceives in them and not the color of their skin, which, of course, this is the whole issue. Why do we judge? Because of that thin outer layer of pigment. And yet we do. Many do. And so that's why we're in this mess, I suppose. Sandy says, the injustice of the justice system, the percentages of black men who are incarcerated has added to that fear. So there's that connotation that black men perhaps are more susceptible or more able or more ready or certainly more involved in illegal activity. And so we always have our guard up, because the worst could happen, I suppose. Some agreement there from Doug. And Betsy says, thinks white people mistrust the people of color. It's based on experience. We just mistrust people of color because we don't have, I guess what you're implying there, Betsy, is we don't have the experience, which is why Andy Stanley says that's part of what can be the antidote to the fear is our experience with those who are of color. Alex says, I believe this to be true in many cases, the idea of white people fear black men. He shines a light on it, truly appreciates knowing the challenges of growing up as a black male in America, or that we don't, rather you're saying, Alex, we are unable to really have a sense of what that must be like for young black men. And you're right, we don't. So, that's part of the struggle too. We can't put ourselves in someone else's shoes. We can try, but ultimately, we're limited. And so that's part of our lack of experience. And Betsy was saying, I think something about that. That's one of the reasons why it's so difficult. no, we don't mistrust, but people of color mistrust us, and rightly so. So, yeah, I think what you're saying there, Betsy, is it's sort of mutual. I mean, this isn't just one side or the other, clearly. There's perhaps fear and mistrust on our side. When I say our, I mean people who are white-skinned, light-skinned. And then certainly the mistrust is there of people of color. And as you're saying, rightly so, as many would say related to the current issues around the way law enforcement interact with people of color and so on. Again, not categorically, not everyone or every person, but we certainly see the incidents that point to what are some real systemic problems there. So it goes both ways, and that's the experience part also goes both ways. As we experience those who are different from us, and they experience us, we who are different from them, some possibilities begin to emerge. All right, let's shift. Let's go on to the next clip. In some ways, I think this is at the kind of core of Andy Stanley's message here. So let's go to it, and we'll be back to discuss.
With all of that as a backdrop, I want to ask you a question. Here's the question I want us to wrestle with, and here's the question that I want us to wrestle with not just today, but every day. If our personal experience is the way forward, as it relates to the variables that you have control over, how do people who don't look like you experience you? If experience is the way forward, and it is, how do people, when it comes to the things that you can control, how do people who don't look like you experience you? Not what do you think about people who don't look like you, not how do you feel about people who don't look like you, and not what do you believe about people who don't look like you. Again, when it comes to the variables that you have control over, how do people who don't look like you experience you? And then, more to the point of what I want to talk about for the next few minutes, how should people who don't look like you experience you?
All right. So I think that question is, as I say, at the heart of what he's after. How should people who don't look like you experience you? So, he's not going to let us be disconnected from this issue. He keeps swinging it back around, inviting us to look in the mirror and to recognize how it is others see us. And I thought this was a really interesting kind of flip, because at the heart of this issue is what we see when we look at others who are different from us. And what he's doing is saying, all right, what happens going the other way? The issue he's wanting us to think about is not what we see and how we think about them, but what they, who are different from us, think when they encounter us. So, I found that to be insightful and also challenging, and I'm not sure, how that kind of hits you. And I'd be interested in any reaction you have to that, what that starts to make you think, or what that implies for you or for me in the way that we may see ourselves in the midst of this issue. But I thought it was both a challenging and really not only creative but appropriate way to be thinking about this. It twists it around. What should others experience in you? And what if that was the focus? In other words, it's sort of like saying, instead of who are they to me, what are they going to do to me, what does being with them mean to me? In other words, all of that is self-centered, if you will. It's focused on what all of that means to me. In fact, I think sometimes what happens, what I fall into, maybe you too, in regards to all of that's going on in our world right now. What it all means to me, how it makes me feel, how it, impacts my life and my outlook. So that's all. I'm not saying that those are wrong thoughts. I'm just saying, let's admit the fact that that's self-centered. Andy Stanley's saying, particularly in regards to this issue of racism, flip that, where our concern is what they see, what they receive from me, what my presence and my attitude and my activity means for them. So it's putting the other at the center instead of myself. Yeah. So here's some feedback coming in. Let's see if I can catch up with some of it. Phil says, the question is what I'm struggling the most with and reflecting upon. I always thought of everyone has the experience with me, but now I'm challenged, again, by this belief of what they encounter, right? It's always me trying to figure out what I'm encountering, and here's that flip. Betsy's clarification and what she was thinking, and I guess I missed that comment, but let me catch up on that, Betsy. Based on experience. Yes, I got you. Okay, thank you for that. I just quickly read your last post there. Other people are colored to experience in us. That's really right on with where we're at here. That it's, yes, there's mistrust coming the other way, and that's because of what they experience in us, what they perceive in us. Catherine says they should see our love and tolerance, and we should see them the same way. So wouldn't that be something if that's indeed what we offered, what we gave, if the focus, if our first thought was what do I bring, what am I giving, what is being received from my presence or my words or my action in the midst of this situation, if that was where we started with this whole thing, I dare say we would not have the issues that we have. So, yeah, thank you for all the thoughts here. Phil says again, that experience quotient to it. Kelly says having some frank conversations with a black woman that you work with, and I know we've talked about that, she and I. And Kelly says pointing out my whiteness is a way that is very eye-opening and helpful as a way to respond to our community. So, part of it's recognizing that we present something to the world, and others perceive something in us, from us, and some of that's wrapped in this light-colored skin that we have. And maybe acknowledging that is one of the most helpful ways to at least begin to think, react, respond to everything differently. Doug says he's got a friend who's involved in the inner city of Cincinnati at a church. A couple of years, he and his wife moved to a very white area, Mason, Ohio. I know where that is, near downtown Cincinnati, and that is experience. So for them and for the community in which they moved into. I think I shared in my sermon the Sunday after George Floyd's death, reflecting back on the time when our family lived in a highly integrated community. And I learned some things about myself. I'd like to say I grew in my awareness and in my appreciation for, again, what is perceived from us and what we perceive in others. And it's that experience that really makes the difference there. So that's a crucial place for Andy's sermon here, his message. What should others who are different from us experience in us or from us? And we don't want to let go of that question. All right, let's move to our next clip, trying to keep things moving along here. I guess this is clip number 4. Just make sure I got my notes in the right place. Oh, yeah. And so now Andy starts talking about Jesus a little bit. Again, there's some challenge wrapped into this for us. So let's listen and we'll come back and discuss.
And here's the thing. You'll know you're getting this right when white culture and black culture become secondary to the one another culture introduced by Jesus. See, here's the thing. When a slice of my culture gets in the way of loving and valuing another human being, that slice of my culture must be temporarily or even perhaps permanently retired. Otherwise, I'll just be content with sad. Otherwise, I'll never step over the line to carry your burden. So, I want to get awkwardly practical for just a minute, because in the messy middle, when the circles come together, when the facts come together, it's always going to be a little bit awkward. So, what does the Jesus brand of love look like in our current context? How should it shape how people who don't look like you experience you? How should it shape how people who don't look like us experience us? Two things. First, and this is certainly not original with me, it is not enough not to be a racist. It is not enough not to be a racist. Non-racist is not the goal. Being non-racist does nothing to address racism. Practically speaking, it amounts to indifference toward racism. If you're a Jesus follower, we must be anti-racism. Just like you're anti-child abuse. Think about it. You wouldn't walk by somebody abusing a child and think to yourself, I'm not a child abuser. You wouldn't walk by and think to yourself, I'm not a child abuser, and say nothing or do nothing. We must be anti-racism like we're anti-bullying, like we're anti-voter fraud, like we're anti-whatever it is that gets you worked up. I mean, think about it this way. If you're a parent, as a parent, I wasn't content to simply be non-liar. I was anti-lie. I did not put up with it in my children and our family, right? I wasn't content with being non-disrespectful to Sandra. I was anti-disrespect to Sandra. There was zero tolerance for disrespecting Sandra in our household. When you are anti-something, you address it when you see it. You speak up when you hear it. To carry somebody's burdens, to carry somebody's burdens is to get up underneath the weight of their burden. And when we decide to carry the burden of anyone who has been discriminated against for any reason, we won't be silent, because now it's our burden. But I gotta warn you, speaking from personal experience, I'll own this. Whether you're white or brown or black, when you shift from non-racist to anti-racist, you may discover something disturbing about you. You may discover a racist in the mirror. You may discover subtle versions of racism that have been hiding, even masquerading as virtues, buried in the recesses of your heart. Racism you were completely unaware of until you decided to say something, correct something, or apologize for something. For some of us, the truth is, when it comes to our hearts, racism will never be rooted out until we are willing to speak out. And honestly, there's probably a little bit of racism in all of us. And who knows, perhaps it will never be completely erased from our hearts, but it must certainly be erased from how people experience us.
Yeah, so I want to pose the question that I think was sort of at the heart of that particular segment, which is his point that it's not enough to be non-racist. He hit that pretty hard. It may be obvious and clear, but let's talk a little bit about it. And as we're doing this, I see that there's some comments even about our own congregation here. We're all white, with the exceptions of 1, 2, or 3. And so, why is that? I mean, part of it's the reality of the neighborhood in which we are, but that doesn't tell the whole story. So again, I know that side conversations go on, but I'm going to keep focused on where we are right now, with the question from Andy Stanley, or at least the point that he's making about the difference between non-racist and anti-racist. Maybe in your own words, if you've got a way to respond, you could just say, how do you hear the difference between those two? What is he saying is important about distinguishing for ourselves the fact that being non-racist, just quite frankly, is not enough? And as you're thinking about that, this is one of those points in his message that made me again pause and think. I don't know that I had ever really had the opportunity to consider the difference, and I was going to say the nuance between those two, but I think it's more than nuance. It's not really a subtle difference. There's really, I think, a fairly clear delineation between one and the other. So if you've got some ways of thinking about that, I'd love to hear that, and we could respond to it. Doug says, they're talking about, again, the church and all of that, so fine, keep that going. But Betsy's got a comment, I guess, about the non-racism. So she says that a non-racist can still be silent in the face of what is racism, and that there's been a lot of that in our world. That may be, I think you're implying there, Betsy, why we are still in this situation all of these generations later, where we assume things are better, but they're really not. And perhaps it's because of the silence of so many. Sandy says being a non-racist will not change anything. So there's a kind of a sense of, if not complacency, I guess of non-action is implied there when you're just a non-racist. Well, I don't participate in that. Oh, others might, but I don't. So there's sort of a non-action element to that. Kathy says the difference is action. There it is. So I think we're on the same wavelength, Kathy, aren't we? And of course, the problem is, we're trying to think about this and put words to it. And I guess what Andy Stanley's saying is that it's not about words. It's it's again this idea of putting it into action, to living it out, and to naming it and challenging it and working for the change of it. Faith says silence in the face of racism means that I'm complicit. So if I say nothing, just to pause right there. Thank you, Faith. His example of child abuse, I think, is the one that kind of made me, wow, I get it. If you saw a child being abused, who of us would just walk past that and say, well, I'm glad I don't do that? No, we'd interject ourselves. We'd say something, we'd do something, we'd call somebody, we'd get at that situation to rescue that child from that situation of being hurt. And it would not be enough just to say, well, I'm a non-child abuser. No, we're anti-child abuse in the sense that we act against it if we saw it, and we would not want to be complicit in it, in any way. So he's saying it's the same. It's the same kind of thing, or should be, he's suggesting to us, offering to us. And there's some challenging there's some challenge in that, I think. So Brian adds, lost some Facebook friends because Brian, is an anti-racist. He must have said some things or responded in some ways on Facebook that others did not like or appreciate. Yeah. Catherine says, because nothing is going to change unless we think like they do or welcome them with Jesus' open arms. And you're talking about those who are different from us. I believe, Catherine, it's about that welcoming, about that active love of embracing and welcoming. Yeah. So, again, another point in this many-pointed sermon or message that makes us pause and think. I want to just catch Alex's comment here. Anti-racism is a bold action. It's shouted loudly from the high hill, even at the risk of being admonished by our beliefs. So it's less about what others think about me or what others will do to me, and more about what needs to come from me in response to the situation. Doug says he's been critical of Muslims who did not denounce the violence of the epidemic in their religion, endemic. And maybe that change needs to start here. So yeah, and Doug, we're all been there. We can point to others where their failings are so clear, and yet, in all humility, what we're saying now is, let's look at ourselves. Let's recognize, where I or we come up short. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to my next clip, and. Again, another, I thought, thought-provoking point in this round. So let's go to it, and we'll be back.
Proximity is not friendship. Proximity is not friendship. Knowing the names of people who don't look like you is not the same as having a friend who doesn't look like you. This is a big part of the solution. Author James Clear has written several really amazing books. He says this. He says, facts don't change our minds. Friendship does. Isn't this true? Facts is what we said earlier. Facts don't change our minds. Friendships change our minds. So as I've urged you in the past, pursue relationships, pursue friendships with people who don't look like you. Engage in their reality. Perhaps this is so overlooked. Perhaps nothing characterized the life of Jesus more than his intentional pursuit of people whose lives and lifestyles were nothing like his. Jesus gets a lot of press for being a friend to the poor and the downtrodden, but that is not the whole story. The men he invited to be his closest companions were from a variety of social contexts. His circle of friendships included the rich people, poor people, working class, religious leaders, a tax gatherer, scribes, women, and ultimately Pharisees. In fact, in the same conversation where he announced his new command, he looks around the room at this collection of day laborers, a zealot, a tax gatherer, and even a traitor. And he says this. He says, I have called you friends. Imagine this. Your Savior, the Savior of the world, your Lord, your Master, calling you friend. He's nothing like you, but he likes you. And then he said this, guys, you did not choose me. I pursued you. I chose you. That's how he loved. That's how Jesus followers love. Not from a distance, not in our hearts, with our hands and with our feet, with invitations, with time, with meals. Here's the thing. If we don't know people, if we fail to listen to people who don't experience the world the way we do, we will never bear their burden. We will not fulfill the law of Christ. We will be content with sad, and we will be content with mad. And we may wear the badge and the label Christian, but we dare not call ourselves Jesus followers. That's why I'm constantly urging you to be a student first and save your criticism for later. The reason you don't understand, the reason you don't understand how white people could, I don't understand how why black people are always, it's because you don't understand. That's on you. That's on me. That's on us, but that must end. As long as we're content, as long as we're content with proximity rather than friendship, we will always discount everything that doesn't fit perfectly into our own flawed world view.
So, proximity is not the same as friendship. And let me just throw that out there as a place to respond. What is it about friendship that brings about change? Why does that, according to Andy, or in the way that we now can think about it, hold such potential to make a difference? It sounds like such a simple thing. And yet what Andy Stanley's saying is there's incredible power in that. So I'm just wondering to know if we can wrap some other understandings around that and perhaps put it here in the chat window for us to consider. In what is there in that? What is there about that friendship that holds such a transformative power? Why is there such hope with that? Any idea? Sam says when you're friends with someone, you get to know them. So the judgments that we make about another then is not based on some kind of stereotype or what somebody else tells us we may think, but becomes, it grows out of our direct and personal and intimate understanding of who they are. So it's that knowledge based in relationship, Sam says. Carol says there's love in friendship. So friendship is both a giving and receiving. Friendship is an affirmation of the other, even as you are affirmed. It has built within it, friendship, this giving and receiving, which seems to be so critical to trying to break through the kind of barriers that we are experiencing culturally. Brian says to be friends, you have to give of yourself. It requires something from you. Again, it's that idea of what do I give? What do I bring? What do I offer? What part of me, is given here to make all this happen? And that's key. Faith says friends tell each other the truth, even when that truth is painful or unpleasant. So, with friends, there's a level of honesty that often is not there otherwise. I think I hear Faith saying. And Catherine says, if you're true friends, you can come together and change the wrongs of this world. So friends work together. Friends hang together. Friends do it together. They stay together. They're together. And there's power in that sense of community. Karen says there's caring and compassion for each other when friendship is at the kind of heart of that relationship. And there's that idea that Tim says again of friends being honest and helping each other to grow. And Kathy says acceptance is involved in friendship. And then Alan says there's great trust and understanding in friendship. It goes a long way to destroying the biases that we have about someone or some issue. One of the things that I've thought about, thanks for that, Alex, one of the things I've thought about over the years, in fact experienced it to be true, in not this issue and many others, when you're able to put a face to the issue, it's not an issue anymore. Then it becomes someone you know. It becomes someone who's a part of your life. So friendship takes a distant, complicated, challenging issue and brings it down to an experience level where then I and the other are a part of it. And then how I think about that issue is informed by, shaped by that relationship. So when you can put a face, when we're able to put a face on the issue, it's not just an issue anymore. It's my relationship with that person. And everything really does start to change. And I don't mean to be so categorically, affirming about this, but it's true. When it becomes someone you know, when it's someone you know, when it's someone who's important to you, then it's important to you. And it makes a difference. Yeah. Carol says, our black friends mentioned above, they shared love and that you love them. And you know what happens when that happens? You don't see black. They don't see white. You see each other. Because love's got that kind of power to transcend all of the differences. I won't preach a sermon, but it's there. You know what the message is. You know what the gospel is. That power of love to transcend everything that divides us and disconnects us from each other and from God. So there's great power here. And I think Andy Stanley's right on when he says it's not the same thing. Just that we know who some black people are, or we know where some of them live, or we know some of their names, or we like them as an entertainer, or whatever it might be. That's at a certain level, but it's not at the most meaningful level. It's friendship. And so you heard what he says there. He challenges us to go out and find those who don't look like us and befriend them. Now that's easier said than done. Friendship isn't a project. Friendship isn't a task that we're going to accomplish and then check off our list. Well, I made that friend, I'm good to go. But, being aware of that now going forward, your life and my life, perhaps I can then position myself in settings and be open in ways I haven't been before to establishing relationships that may then grow into friendships that then have the capacity to transform me and the other in this tension around racial relationship, because we become a part of it in a positive way. So worthy of taking all that to heart. Okay, one more clip, last clip. I always try to keep these at an hour. We're over an hour, I know, but this will be the last one. And appreciate you hanging in there together and with me and for this. So this clip, all the other clips have been in sequence. In other words, if you move through the message. You're going to 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've gone through 5 clips now, and they've been sequential, not in the timeline, one after the other, but this in the flow of the sermon. Every so often I've clipped certain segments. This one I went back to grab because it's more toward the middle of the message, but I thought for our purposes, at least for where I feel we might want to end things tonight, it was a good place to kind of come back to it. So he's talking now here again about Jesus and about the command of Jesus to love, which fits perfectly with where we just were as we were talking about friendship. So let's view the clip and we'll come back and wrap things up for tonight.
Jesus, who on his final pre-crucifixion night replaced all 10 commandments with one commandment, a better commandment, a new commandment. He reduced all of life. This isn't an exaggeration. He reduced all of life to one transgenerationally relevant, unchangeable command that has the potential to change everything in spite of how things change. A new commandment, he said, a new commandment I give you, love one another. Of course, that wasn't new, but of course, he wasn't through. He defined it for us. As I have loved you, this is his definition. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. This was a new command. Jesus followers, this was not a new suggestion. It was so central. He said this, you remember this. By this one thing, not 10 things, not 600 things, by this one thing, you will know, people will know that you are my disciples if you love one another as I have loved you. So, how should people who don't look like you experience you like that? How should people who don't look like me experience me like that?
Like that. So, my question, as we move to a wrap up here tonight, of course, there's no way to end this necessarily. We're just on the way together, but at least for our purposes here this evening, why is it hard to love the way Jesus loves? It seems to me that it is. Now we talk about it, I think, and imply that it shouldn't be hard, but I think the reality is it certainly appears to be hard. And so I honestly, and I don't have an answer to the question, I really don't, but I'd love to get any reaction you have or response that you have as to why it is so hard for us to live, or to love rather, the way that Jesus loved. As Andy Stanley mentions here, this is the command. This is the requirement for those of us who follow Jesus and who have said yes to him and to his way of life in this world. And yet, it then becomes so difficult for us to do that. And honestly, I'm trying to figure out why it's so hard to do. Brian says because we don't know each other. And I suppose we could press that and say, we're fearful of each other, back to where we were earlier tonight. And somebody even said we don't want to know each other. That we become so content just to kind of close in and close off and just have my world and my life be my world, my life, and I'm good with that kind of thinking. And yet, Jesus keeps calling us out away from ourselves, out beyond just the limitations of my own care and concern. Sam says, it shouldn't be hard. God made everyone. And so Sam, that it's kind of like, there it is. Yes, that's the obvious, right? God made us all. And yet we do forget that and experience the challenge of maintaining that love with each other. Sandy says, we want to protect ourselves and not risk, so not fully give. Again, it's that idea of if I open myself up, if I put myself out there, if I give of myself, then I'll just end up losing what I need to have. And so that self-anxious, that self-protectiveness takes over. That seems to be kind of part of our human experience. Catherine says it's tough to love because we aren't perfect like Jesus. We're not able maybe to live up to that standard, I guess you're saying. And also, you also think that we have too many expectations of others and don't want to be hurt. So again, it's just, we put a lot of conditions on unconditional love, I guess is what we're saying. And when we keep laying on the conditions that this is the way it must be, or the way it has to be, or the way it should be, then we've lost sight of the way God enables it to be, which is this affirming, loving, gracious, peace-centered, other-centered way of life. So that's a good stopping point for us, but before we stop, it's actually another jumping off point that I wanted to share with you. I mentioned the description box back at the video page where you found the webcast listed tonight. And down below there, you'll see a couple of other links that I wanted to point you to. One is a webcast series, a 6-session series that I'm going to do in July, beginning in July on Thursday evenings. And it's on a book by Tom Berlin called Reckless Love. It picks up right from this point of Jesus' command to love others, and particularly in Tom Berlin's book, it's how we love others who are different from us. So it's not specifically about racism, but it certainly addresses the issues that contribute to racism. So I wanted to point that out and invite you and hopefully others as well to be a part of that series. It'll be a webcast much like this. And then you also see a link there for a 3-session Zoom class that Deacon Sandy Huber is going to be doing. Sandy's been on with us here tonight. And it's a book that talks about dismantling racism in America, about the living into that dream of really making a difference and a change. And that link will take you to the registration page for that, and if you'd reach out to Sandy, I know she could answer any questions as well. So I wanted to highlight that as an option. That's coming earlier in July, just ahead of my webcast series that I'll do in the middle of July. So we've got some more things coming, and I just want to say again, I appreciate the time that you have given on a beautiful summer evening to come together, to open up some discussion, to receive the message that Andy Stanley has offered to us. I think I'm going to revisit that message, his message. In fact, I've seen it many times already, but I'm going to hang on to it and go back to it, because every time I listen to it, there's another piece of it that speaks to me differently and in an important way, and that may happen for you too. So stay encouraged, as our Bishop Gregory Palmer says, be encouraged. There's much that I know is serious and weighty and troublesome in our world. Racism is one of those things, and there are others, I know. I feel that both personally, professionally, just as all of you do. And there are times when it seems heavier than we can bear. But we know that God's with us. And again, all of these things that we've been talking about tonight, the capacity to love and the gift of being in relationship with one another, all of those aspects that are so life-giving are also centered in our faith. And that truly is our salvation. And it will set us free and will set others free whom we know and care about and stand up for in our world. So keep at it. And I'll be praying for you. I appreciate prayers coming my way as well. And we'll just stay in this together. For now, I'm going to sign off. But you all take care, and we'll see you next time around.